Chapter 1. The cathedral bells tolled like a death knell as she tore the veil from her face and ran straight into the storm that would either save her or destroy her forever. Lady Alara Voss had believed, until mere minutes earlier, that this day would mark the quiet salvation of her family. Instead, it became the moment everything shattered. She had stood at the altar in her pristine white gown, hands steady only because she forced them to be. The heavy scent of lilies filled the nave. Sunlight filtered weakly through stained glass, painting the stone floor in muted colors. Baron Hargrove waited beside the priest, golden-haired and impeccably turned out in midnight blue, offering the congregation that practiced, winning smile. To everyone watching, he was the ideal match for the Voss heiress, the man who would restore the family's crumbling fortunes with his title, his connections, and the promise of stability. But Alara had seen the truth in the vestry. She had slipped away for a final breath of solitude, needing to quiet the nervous flutter in her chest before the vows. The side chamber door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open without sound and stopped cold. Baron Hargrove had Lady Clarissa Montford pressed against the damp stone wall. Clarissa's skirts were bunched indecently high, his mouth moved greedily along her throat. Her soft, triumphant laugh drifted through the small space. "My darling," Hargrove murmured, voice thick with satisfaction, "once the ceremony is done and the dowry is mine, we'll have endless nights. Alara will never suspect how little she means." Clarissa's fingers curled possessively in his hair. "And the Voss debts? You'll settle them with her money, then quietly set her aside when the moment is convenient." "Exactly," he answered, kissing her again with careless hunger. "She's a transaction. Nothing more." The words struck Alara like physical blows. Her dowry, the final asset her father had not yet lost to cards and drink, was the sole reason Hargrove had courted her. There had never been affection, never even genuine interest. Only calculation. She retreated silently, bile burning her throat. Outside, the organ swelled, signaling the procession was about to begin. Guests murmured with anticipation. Her mother sat in the front pew, frail and hopeful, clinging to the belief that this marriage would save them all. Her younger sisters, still unmarriageable if scandal touched the family name, depended on today going perfectly. Alara could not walk down that aisle. She could not speak vows to a man who planned to use her, humiliate her, and discard her. So she fled. The great oak doors flew open beneath her palms. Rain exploded across her face, cold, merciless, instantly soaking through silk and lace. Her slippers skidded on the slick stone steps. She caught the iron railing to keep from falling, heart slamming against her ribs. Behind her, confusion erupted into shouts. "Alara!" Her mother's voice cracked with panic. "Stop her!" Hargrove barked, fury stripping away his polished mask. She did not look back. Lifting the heavy, already drenched skirts, she ran into the downpour. The white gown turned nearly transparent, clinging to her legs like icy chains. Thunder rolled overhead, lightning split the bruised sky. Cobbled streets blurred beneath her flying feet, gas lamps flickered feebly, barely piercing the grey curtain of rain. Her breath came in sharp, painful bursts. She had no destination, no hidden purse, no waiting carriage. The family townhouse lay miles away, and even if she reached it, her father would almost certainly haul her back to the cathedral to preserve whatever scraps of reputation remained. Yet beneath the terror and the cold that seeped into her bones, something fiercer stirred. She was finished being the obedient sacrifice. If her life was to burn, it would burn by her own hand, not his. Turning down a narrow alley to evade the main roads where pursuit might follow, she pressed on. Rain stung her eyes, plastered dark curls to her cheeks. The torn veil streamed behind her like a sodden ghost. Each step grew heavier, strength leaching away with every freezing minute. Still she ran. Somewhere beyond the town's edge, the road twisted toward the wild, windswept moors. Somewhere in that darkness waited whatever fate claimed a bride who had just set her entire world ablaze in the most public way imaginable. She did not yet know that a black carriage waited in the storm's shadows, its occupant the one man all of society feared more than scandal itself. The Duke of Blackthorn. But that revelation still lay ahead. For now, there was only the rain, the thunder, and the desperate rhythm of her own heartbeat driving her forward into the unknown. Chapter 2. Rain lashed her skin like accusations as the soaked gown clung and tripped her until the thunder masked the sound of hooves and a black carriage loomed from the darkness. Ilara's legs burned. Each step dragged heavier than the last, the weight of waterlogged silk and petticoats pulling her toward the mud. The narrow alley had long since given way to a rutted country lane that twisted beyond the last gaslit houses of the town. Here the storm ruled unchallenged, wind howled through skeletal trees, branches clawing at the sky like desperate fingers. Lightning illuminated the world in stark, fleeting white enough to show her she was utterly alone. Her breath came in shallow, painful bursts. The cold had seeped so deep that her fingers no longer ached, they simply refused to bend. She had lost one slipper somewhere back in the cobbles. The remaining one squelched with every stride, offering no protection against the sharp stones hidden beneath the flooding road. She told herself she only needed to keep moving. One more bend in the lane. One more stretch of darkness. Surely the storm would ease, or dawn would come, or anyone would pass. But the truth pressed harder than the rain. No one was coming. Not her mother, who would be weeping in the cathedral pews. Not her father, who would already be calculating how much disgrace this flight had cost him. Certainly not Hargrove, whose fury would be cold and methodical now that his prize had slipped away. Ilara stumbled, caught herself against the low stone wall that bordered the lane, and felt fresh tears mix with the rainwater on her cheeks. She was not crying for the Baron. She was crying for the girl who had believed duty and sacrifice would be enough, who had spent years swallowing disappointment so her sisters might have a chance at happiness. That girl was gone. She pushed off the wall and forced herself onward. The lane climbed a gentle rise, then descended toward what looked like open moorland. Wind tore at the remnants of her veil, whipping it across her face until she ripped it free entirely and let it fly into the night. Her hair, dark and heavy, plastered to her neck and shoulders. Then she heard it. Not thunder this time. Hooves. Heavy, deliberate, drawing nearer. Ilara froze. Her heart, already racing, slammed against her ribs with fresh terror. Pursuit. Hargrove's men? A search party from the cathedral? Or worse, highwaymen who would see a lone, drenched woman in a wedding gown as easy prey? She pressed herself against the stone wall, willing the shadows to swallow her. The sound grew louder, multiple hooves now, the creak of wheels, the jingle of harness. A carriage. Not galloping in panic, but moving with purpose through the worst of the gale. Lightning cracked again. There, silhouetted against the momentary brilliance, was a large black coach, lacquered to a mirror shine despite the downpour. 4 matched horses, their coats steaming. No crest visible on the door, yet the equipage screamed wealth and menace in equal measure. The carriage slowed. Ilara's pulse roared in her ears. Run, every instinct screamed. Hide. But her body betrayed her, knees buckling, vision swimming from cold and exhaustion. She slid down the wall until she knelt in the muddy verge, one hand clutching at the wet grass as though it could anchor her to the earth. The carriage rolled to a stop no more than 20 paces away. The door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. A tall figure descended. He moved with the economical grace of a predator, heedless of the rain that sheeted off the brim of his beaver hat and darkened the shoulders of his greatcoat. Even in the storm's chaos, Ilara felt the weight of his presence before she could make out his features. He paused at the bottom step, surveyed the desolate lane, then turned his head toward her. Lightning flashed once more. Scar tissue carved a jagged path from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw, pale against the shadowed planes of his face. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in that instant of stark light, and utterly without warmth. The rest of him was hard lines and controlled power, broad shoulders, gloved hands already curling into fists at his sides. He regarded her the way one might regard a wounded animal that had wandered too close to the kennels, annoyance warring with faint curiosity. For a long moment neither moved. Then his voice cut through the storm, low and rough, carrying effortlessly despite the wind. "You are a very long way from any ballroom, madam." Ilara tried to stand. Her legs refused. She managed only to lift her chin, meeting that glacial stare as best she could. I require no assistance, she said. The words came out thinner than she intended, cracked by cold and pride. One dark brow rose a fraction. Evidently. He took a single step closer. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto the collar of his coat. He did not seem to notice. You will catch your death out here, he continued, tone flat. And I have no desire to explain a corpse on my property line come morning. Ilara swallowed. Your property? Blackthorn Manor lies half a mile beyond that rise. He jerked his chin toward the darkness ahead. If you intend to die dramatically in a ditch, kindly do it on someone else's land. The insult stung, yet there was no mockery in his voice, only cold fact. She forced herself to her feet, swaying. I will manage. You are half drowned and barefoot. You will not. He studied her another heartbeat, then turned abruptly toward the open carriage door. Get in. It was not an invitation. It was a command. Ilara hesitated. Every whispered rumor about the Duke of Blackthorn rushed through her mind, the soldier who had returned from the peninsula more beast than man, the recluse who shunned society. The man whose temper had once broken a dueling opponent without ever drawing steel. Feared. Avoided. Dangerous. And yet the alternative was to collapse here and let the storm or Hargrove's men find her. Pride warred with survival. Survival won. She took one trembling step, then another, until she reached the carriage step. The Duke did not offer his hand. He merely waited, expression unreadable. Ilara climbed inside on shaking limbs. The door closed behind her with a solid, final thud. Chapter 3. He looked down at her like she was a drowned rat in his path, voice low and merciless. You have one breath to explain why I shouldn't leave you to the wolves. Ilara sat shivering on the velvet bench of the carriage, water pooling at her feet, every inch of her sodden gown clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The interior was dark and richly appointed, black leather, polished wood, the faint scent of leather and smoke, but it offered no warmth. The Duke had climbed in after her without another word, slammed the door, and rapped sharply on the roof. The carriage lurched forward at once, wheels churning through mud and gravel. She lifted her chin, forcing her chattering teeth to still long enough to speak. I am Lady Ilara Voss, she said, voice steadier than she felt. I left my wedding. I have nowhere else to go tonight. A beat of silence. Rain hammered the roof like impatient fingers. The Duke Cassian Thorne, Duke of Blackthorn, leaned back against the opposite seat, arms crossed, grey eyes unreadable in the dimness. The scar that marred the left side of his face caught the occasional flash of lightning through the window, a cruel, pale line from eye to jaw, pulling slightly when he spoke. Left, he repeated, the word flat and skeptical. Most brides walk down the aisle. Very few sprint into a storm in their finery. Heat rose in her cheeks despite the cold. My fiancé was otherwise occupied. With someone else. In the vestry. Minutes before the ceremony. Another silence, longer this time. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more a flicker of grim understanding. Convenient timing for both of you, then. Ilara's hands clenched in her lap. I did not ask for your judgment, your grace. Only a roof until morning. You are in my carriage, he said coolly. That already constitutes more charity than I am accustomed to dispensing. Do not mistake necessity for kindness. She met his gaze without flinching. I mistake nothing. The carriage rattled over a particularly deep rut. She braced herself against the side to keep from sliding. He did not move to assist. They traveled in tense quiet for what felt like an eternity, though the rise he had mentioned proved accurate. Less than 10 minutes later the horses slowed, iron gates creaked open as if by unseen hands. And the drive curved upward toward a looming silhouette against the stormlit sky. Blackthorn Manor. Even in the darkness and driving rain, the house was unmistakable, tall, jagged towers piercing the clouds, windows like narrow, watchful eyes, ivy clawing up blackened stone as though trying to pull the place back into the earth. No welcoming lights glowed in the lower windows. Only a single lantern burned above the massive double doors, swaying violently in the wind. The carriage rolled to a halt. The Duke opened the door himself before the footman could reach it, stepped down into the deluge without hesitation, and turned back to her. Out. Ilara rose on unsteady legs. The moment her bare foot touched the gravel drive, fresh cold shot up her spine. She followed him up the wide stone steps, skirts dragging, hair plastered across her face. The doors swung inward as they approached, opened by a tall, gaunt butler whose expression remained perfectly blank despite the sight of his master returning with a half-drowned bride. Warm water, dry clothes, the east guest chamber, the Duke ordered without preamble. And tell Mrs. Hale to prepare broth. She looks ready to faint. The butler bowed. At once, Your Grace. Cassian turned to Ilara then, rain still dripping from his hat brim. Up close, in the lantern light, the scar was more pronounced, the grey of his eyes colder. You will be given a room, food, and a fire, he said. In the morning you will leave. I do not keep strays, and I have no interest in whatever scandal you have trailing behind you. She swallowed. I understand. Do you? He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his soaked greatcoat despite the chill in his voice. This is not a refuge for runaway brides. Blackthorn is not kind to guests, and I am not kind to anyone. Stay out of my way. Speak only when spoken to. And do not mistake my hospitality for anything more than duty to basic decency. Ilara lifted her eyes to his. Beneath the ice, beneath the deliberate cruelty of his words, she glimpsed something else, a flicker of old pain, quickly buried. I have no wish to impose, she said quietly. Thank you, for not leaving me in the ditch. He studied her another moment, jaw tight. Do not thank me yet, he replied. You may yet wish I had. With that he turned on his heel and strode deeper into the hall, greatcoat dripping a trail across the black and white marble floor. The butler appeared at her elbow, expression still impassive. This way, my lady. Ilara followed, legs trembling with exhaustion and something she could not yet name. The east guest chamber was vast, cold, and beautiful in a severe way, high ceilings, dark paneling, a four-poster bed draped in heavy burgundy velvet. A fire already roared in the grate, steam rose from a copper tub being filled by two silent maids. Dry clothes, simple but finely made, lay across a chair, a nightdress, robe, stockings. She sank onto the edge of the bed the moment the door closed behind her, the enormity of the night crashing down at last. She had fled a cathedral, a fiancé, her family's expectations, and somehow ended up beneath the roof of the most feared man in 3 counties. Cassian Thorne had not offered comfort. He had offered shelter with all the warmth of a drawn sword. Yet as she peeled the ruined wedding gown from her skin and stepped into the steaming water, letting heat seep back into her frozen limbs, one thought lingered sharper than the rest. Beneath his merciless words, beneath the scar and the ice, the Duke of Blackthorn was a man who had once been wounded very deeply. And she had the uneasy feeling that the storm outside was only the beginning. Chapter 4. In the flickering candlelight of the guest chamber, she saw the scars, jagged lines across his jaw and chest, and realized the rumors of the monster Duke were born of something far deeper than war. Ilara had not intended to see them at all. She had bathed until the water cooled, wrapped herself in the borrowed nightdress and heavy robe, and tried to sleep. But the storm still raged outside, wind rattling the tall windows like impatient fists, and her mind refused to quiet. Every creak of the ancient house seemed to echo the questions she could not silence. Where would she go at dawn? What would Hargrove do when he found her gone? And why had the Duke of Blackthorn, of all people, chosen to bring her here instead of leaving her to the rain? Eventually she rose, lit a single taper from the dying fire, and slipped into the corridor. Blackthorn Manor was larger than she had imagined, its hallways stretching into shadow like the veins of some sleeping beast. The candle threw long, wavering shapes across dark paneling and threadbare tapestries. She moved quietly, barefoot on cold stone, drawn by nothing more than restless curiosity and the need to feel less like a prisoner. She passed a grand staircase, then a closed library door, then paused at the faint murmur of voices drifting from a half-open servant's passage. Still won't speak of it, even after all these years. A woman's voice, older, hushed. Nor should he, came the reply, deeper, male. Lady Amelia ran off with his own brother the night before the wedding. Left him standing at the altar like a fool, the whole county laughing behind their fans. No wonder he shut himself away. Ilara's breath caught. She pressed closer to the wall, heart thudding. War finished what she started, the woman continued. Came back with that scar and a temper to match. They say he killed a man in a duel over nothing more than a glance. But I've seen him stare at the portrait in the long gallery, her portrait, and there's something broken in his eyes. Enough, the man said sharply. His Grace hears whispers like these and heads roll. Best we keep our own counsel. Footsteps retreated. Ilara waited until silence returned, then slipped away, mind racing. Betrayed at the altar. By the woman he loved. By his own brother. The parallel struck her like a physical blow. No wonder his voice had carried that bitter edge when he spoke of her own flight. No wonder he offered shelter with the warmth of drawn steel. She turned a corner and found herself in a narrower passage lined with closed doors. At the far end, a faint line of light spilled from beneath one. Curiosity tugged harder than caution. She approached, hesitated, then pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Only the crackle of a fire and the low howl of wind down the chimney. She turned the handle, slowly, silently, and eased the door open a fraction. The room beyond was a study, or perhaps a private sitting room. Heavy bookshelves lined the walls, a fire roared in a blackened grate. And there, standing with his back to her, shirt discarded on a nearby chair, was Cassian Thorne. He had not heard her enter. In the firelight, the scars were stark. Not just the one on his face, others crisscrossed his broad back and shoulders, some thin and silver, others thick and angry, as though the war had tried to tear him apart piece by piece. His dark hair was damp, falling across his brow, muscles shifted beneath the marred skin as he reached for a decanter on the mantel. Ilara should have retreated. She knew it. Yet she could not look away. He turned then, slowly, deliberately, and caught her gaze. For a heartbeat neither moved. Then his expression hardened into something lethal. "What the devil are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous. He made no move to cover himself, as though daring her to flinch at the sight of his ruined flesh. Ilara's mouth went dry. I could not sleep. I was only snooping," he finished. He set the decanter down with careful control. "In my house. At night. In a robe that belongs to a dead woman." The words landed like a slap. She realized with a jolt that the nightdress she wore, simple ivory lawn trimmed in black lace, must once have belonged to Lady Amelia. "I did not know," she said quickly. "The maids. The maids follow orders." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin despite the chill in his voice. "You were told to stay in your chamber. I am not your prisoner. You are a guest under sufferance. Guests do not wander my halls like thieves." Anger flared in her chest, burning away the last of her exhaustion. "And hosts do not speak to guests as though they are vermin. I am grateful for the shelter, Your Grace, but I will not be treated like a criminal for being unable to sleep in a house that groans like a dying man." His eyes narrowed. Up close, the scar pulled taut when he frowned, giving his face a perpetual half-snarl. "You speak boldly for a woman who arrived here barefoot and begging." "I did not beg. You collapsed at my gates. Close enough." She lifted her chin. "Then why bring me inside at all? Why not leave me to the wolves, as you so charmingly threatened?" For the first time, something flickered in those pale eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant amusement. "Because," he said after a long pause, "I have seen enough women broken by men who promised them safety and delivered only pain. I will not add to the tally tonight." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Ilara searched his face. Beneath the ice, beneath the deliberate cruelty, the pain the servants had whispered about was unmistakable now, old, deep, and fiercely guarded. "You were betrayed too," she said softly. It was not a question. His jaw tightened. "That is none of your concern." "Perhaps not. But I understand what it is to stand at an altar and realize the person beside you sees only what you can give them, not who you are." He studied her in silence. The fire popped behind him, sending sparks up the chimney. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost rough. Go back to your room, Lady Alara. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. Dawn is not far off, and with it your departure. She did not move at once. Instead she asked, very quietly, do the scars still hurt? He exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been a laugh or a curse. Every day. She nodded once, as though the answer confirmed something she had already guessed. Then she turned and walked away, robe trailing behind her like a shadow. Cassian remained where he stood, watching her go, the firelight carving harsh lines across his scarred chest. Neither of them slept that night. Chapter 5. He pinned her against the library wall, breath hot against her ear. Your baron will come searching. Marry me in name only, and I'll shield you from him and from ruin. Ilara's back met the cool oak paneling with a soft thud. Cassian's forearm braced beside her head, caging her without quite touching. His other hand rested flat against the wall at her waist. He had moved so swiftly she had barely registered the door opening behind her as she passed the library on her way back to her chamber. One moment she was in the corridor, the next she was here, heart hammering, the scent of wood smoke and rain-soaked wool filling her lungs. She refused to shrink. How did you know I was there? She asked, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. I heard your footsteps. His grey eyes bored into hers. You move like someone who expects to be chased. Perhaps because I have been. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He did not step back. News travels faster than runaway brides, he said. A rider arrived an hour ago. Your former fiancé has wasted no time. His claiming you were abducted by force, no less, offers a substantial reward for your safe return. The scandal is already spreading, whispers in every tavern between here and the cathedral. Your family is in hysterics. Your father has apparently taken to his bed with a bottle. Ilara closed her eyes for a single heartbeat. The image of her mother's pale face, her sister's frightened eyes, flashed behind her lids. And Hargrove? She asked quietly. Raging. Swearing vengeance. Swearing to drag you back to the altar if he must carry you over the threshold himself. Cassian's voice dropped lower. He will not stop at rumors. He will come here. Soon. She opened her eyes again. Then I should leave. Before dawn. Before he arrives. And go where? He leaned in fractionally. Heat radiated from him despite the chill in the room. Back to your father's house, where he will hand you over to save face. To some inn where Hargrove's men will find you before noon. You are penniless, barefoot no more than hours ago, and dressed in clothes that once belonged to the woman who destroyed me. You have no allies, no money, no plan. The words stung because they were true. Ilara swallowed. I will find a way. You will not. His gaze flicked to her mouth, then back to her eyes. Not without help. She searched his face, the scar, the hard line of his mouth, the guarded storm in his eyes. And you would offer it. Why? Because I know what it is to be hunted by someone who believes they own you. He paused, the admission seeming to cost him. And because I have no wish to see another woman broken on the altar of a man's pride. Silence stretched between them, thick with rain and unspoken history. Then he spoke again, voice rough. Marry me. In name only. A contract. I become your husband on paper, your legal shield. Hargrove cannot touch you without facing me. Your family's debts remain untouched by his schemes. You gain protection, time, and the freedom to disappear when the storm passes. In return, you stay here until the danger fades. You ask nothing more of me. I ask nothing more of you. Ilara's pulse roared in her ears. A sham marriage. To the Duke of Blackthorn. The man society called monster, recluse, mad. Yet the alternative was worse. How soon? She whispered. Tonight. Before first light. There is a chapel on the estate. The vicar owes me a favor. No banns. No guests. No questions. She studied him. And after, you are free to go wherever you choose. Or stay, if you find the moors less hostile than the world beyond them. The choice will be yours. Ilara exhaled slowly. Every instinct screamed caution. Yet every other part of her, the part that had run through the storm rather than submit, recognized the lifeline he extended. "I accept," she said. Cashin's eyes darkened, but he gave no other sign of triumph or relief. He stepped back, releasing her from the wall. "Then come." The rain had not relented. By the time they reached the small stone chapel tucked behind the manor's east wing, water streamed from the eaves in silver curtains. The vicar waited inside, lantern in hand, expression carefully neutral. A single candle burned on the altar, shadows danced across worn flagstones and faded kneelers. Ilara wore the same borrowed robe over the nightdress, hardly bridal, yet somehow fitting for this clandestine union. Cassian had changed into dark trousers and coat, still damp at the shoulders. No flowers. No music. Only the relentless drum of rain on the slate roof. They stood before the vicar. "Do you, Cassian Alexander Thorne, take this woman?" "I do," he said, voice low and certain. The vicar turned to her. "Do you, Ilara Catherine Voss, take this man?" "I do," she answered. The words felt heavier than the storm outside. Rings were produced, simple gold bands from a drawer in the vestry, cold against her skin. Cassian slid one onto her finger without ceremony. She did the same for him. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. The vicar pronounced them husband and wife. No kiss. No applause. Only the finality of the words and the thunder that answered. Cassian offered his arm. She took it. They walked back through the rain-soaked gardens in silence, water soaking through her slippers once more. At the manor doors he paused, turning to her. "You are safe here," he said. "For as long as you need." She met his gaze. "And you? What do you gain from this?" For the first time, something almost like a smile ghosted his lips, bitter, fleeting. "Perhaps the satisfaction of denying another man what he believes is his by right." He opened the door for her. Inside, the fire in the great hall still burned. Servants had vanished. The house felt vast and watchful. Cassian stopped at the foot of the staircase. "Your chamber is yours alone," he said. "I will not cross that threshold unless you invite me. This bargain holds." Ilara nodded. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," he replied, echoing his words from the night before. "Survive the next days. That will be thanks enough." He turned away, disappearing down a shadowed corridor. Ilara climbed the stairs alone, ring heavy on her finger, the storm still raging beyond the windows. She was no longer Lady Ilara Voss. She was the Duchess of Blackthorn. At least on paper. And somewhere in the darkness, Baron Hargrove was coming. Chapter 6. Our wedding night was silent until he stood at my door, voice raw. "I swore never to touch another woman, but you are unraveling every vow I've made." Ilara froze with her hand still on the latch. She had not expected anyone to knock. The manor had fallen quiet after the chapel ceremony. Even the storm had finally retreated to a low, restless murmur beyond the windows. She had changed into the nightdress again, the same one that had once belonged to Lady Amelia, and sat by the fire, staring at the gold band on her finger as though it might speak and explain what she had just done. The knock came again, softer this time. She opened the door a crack. Cassian stood in the corridor, coat discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair still damp from the rain. The firelight from her chamber spilled across his scarred face, softening the hard edges for the first time. "I did not mean to disturb you," he said. "You are not." She stepped back, allowing him entrance. "It is your house." He hesitated on the threshold, as though crossing it would break the terms of their bargain. "I came to ensure the door was locked," he said at last. "And to tell you the outer gates have been secured. No one will reach you tonight." She nodded. "Thank you." He did not leave. Instead he leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, eyes on the fire rather than on her. "You should eat. You've barely touched anything since you arrived." "I am not hungry." "You will be." He straightened. "There is a tray in the hall. I will have it brought in." Before she could protest, he had turned and disappeared down the corridor. Minutes later a maid appeared with a silver tray, bread, cheese, cold meat, a pot of tea, and a small bowl of stewed apples. She set it on the low table by the fire and curtsied silently before withdrawing. Cassian returned shortly after, carrying a second glass and a decanter of brandy. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. Ilara inclined her head. They sat in the flickering light, the only sounds the crackle of logs and the occasional distant roll of thunder. He poured a measure of brandy for himself, then hesitated over the second glass. "Tea or something stronger?" he asked. "Tea," she said. "I need a clear head." He poured for her anyway, then settled back, cradling his own glass. For a long while neither spoke. Then he said, quietly, "You did not have to agree. I know. You could have asked for passage to London. A purse. A horse. I would have given it. I know that too." She met his gaze across the fire. "But Hargrove would have found me. And my family, they would have suffered for my refusal. This way, the scandal is contained. For now." He studied her. "You think of them still. Even after what they asked of you. They are my blood. I cannot simply erase them." A muscle worked in his jaw. Blood is not always kind. She heard the echo of his own story in the words, the brother who had taken his fiancée, the family name that had become a curse rather than a shield. "Tell me about her," Ilara said softly. "Amelia." Cassian's fingers tightened around the glass. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he exhaled, long and slow. "She was beautiful. Clever. Everyone said we were perfectly matched. I believed it." He stared into the flames. "The night before the wedding she left a note. Said she could not bear a life of duty when passion waited elsewhere. My brother waited with her at the coaching inn. They were gone by dawn." Ilara's heart twisted. "I am sorry." "Do not be." His voice was rough. "I learned what I needed to learn, that promises are fragile things, and trust is a luxury I can no longer afford." She set her teacup down. "Yet you offered me your name tonight. Why?" His eyes lifted to hers. "Because Hargrove is the same kind of man I once was, arrogant, certain he could own what he desired. I will not let him have you." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Days blurred into nights. Meals were taken together in the small dining parlor, quiet affairs at first, then slowly lengthening as conversation crept in. He spoke of the estate, of the tenants, of the war that had left its marks on more than his skin. She spoke of her sisters, of the books she had read in secret, of the dreams she had once harbored before duty swallowed them. He never touched her. Never crossed the invisible line they had drawn. But he watched her. And she watched him. One evening, as rain returned to lash the windows, a servant brought word. A stranger had been seen on the moor road asking questions about a missing bride. Cassian's face darkened. He left the table without a word. An hour later he returned, coat dripping, knuckles bruised. "The spy is dealt with," he said simply. "He will not report back." Ilara rose. "You fought him?" "I persuaded him." His tone left no room for details. She stepped closer. "You did not have to risk yourself." "I am your husband," he said, the words still sounding foreign on his tongue. "In name or not, that means something." They stood inches apart. The fire had burned low, shadows danced across his face, highlighting the scar, the tension in his jaw. Ilara lifted her hand slowly, carefully, and touched the edge of the scar on his cheek. He flinched, but did not pull away. "You do not have to carry this alone," she whispered. His hand rose to cover hers, warm and calloused. For a moment they simply breathed in the same space. Then he leaned in. Their mouths were a heartbeat apart, close enough to feel each other's warmth, to taste the brandy on his breath when he froze. His fingers tightened on hers. "I cannot," he rasped. "I swore never again. Never to let another woman close enough to wound me." Ilara did not move. "I am not her." "I know." His voice cracked. "That is what terrifies me." He stepped back, breaking the contact, eyes shadowed with old fear and new longing. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "Good night, Ilara." He left without another word. She stood alone by the fire, lips still tingling from the almost kiss, heart pounding with something she had not allowed herself to name. Outside, the rain whispered against the glass as though the storm itself were holding its breath, waiting for what came next. Chapter 7. When Lord Hargrove arrived at the gates demanding his stolen bride, Cassion's hand tightened on hers, and the ice in his eyes turned to fire. The summons came at midday, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over Blackthorn Manor in the days following their near kiss. Ilara had been in the long gallery, tracing the faded gilt frames of ancestral portraits, when the butler appeared, breathless, expression grave. "Baron Hargrove is at the gates, Your Grace," he said to Cassian, who had entered moments earlier with a ledger in hand. "He insists on speaking with Lady, forgive me, the Duchess. He has men with him. Armed." Cassian set the ledger down without a sound. His face betrayed nothing at first, only that familiar, glacial calm. But Ilara saw the shift, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed once, then stilled. "Tell him the Duchess is not at home to callers," Cassian said evenly. The butler bowed and withdrew. Ilara stepped forward. "He will not leave without seeing me. He will leave when I say he leaves." She touched his arm. "Cassian. Let me face him. Hiding only gives him power." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. Something raw flickered there, something that had not been present before the night he had almost kissed her. "Very well," he said at last. "But you will not face him alone." They walked together to the great hall. Servants had already drawn back the heavy drapes, pale winter light streamed across the black and white marble floor. Outside, through the tall windows, Ilara could see the gates, Hargrove astride a bay stallion, flanked by 4 mounted men in dark livery. Rain had begun again, light but steady, turning the gravel drive to a slick mirror. Cassian gave a curt nod to the footman. The massive doors were opened. Hargrove dismounted with theatrical flourish, tossing his reins to one of his men. He strode forward, boots clicking on stone, smile fixed and sharp as a blade. "Lady Ilara," he called, voice carrying across the courtyard. "Or should I say Duchess? How quaint. I see you've traded one title for another in record time." Cassian moved to stand slightly in front of her, one hand resting lightly but unmistakably at the small of her back. "You are trespassing, Hargrove," he said. "State your business and leave." Hargrove's gaze flicked to Cassian, then back to Ilara. His smile widened. "My business is simple. I have come to collect what is mine." He reached into his greatcoat and withdrew a sheaf of papers, holding them aloft like a trophy. "Your father's debts, my dear. Quite a sum. All signed over to me the morning of our intended wedding as collateral for the dowry that never materialized. Legally binding. If you do not return with me now, I will call them due immediately. Your family will be ruined. Your sisters will be turned out. Your mother will end her days in a debtor's prison." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. She had known the debts existed, but not that Hargrove held the notes, not that he had maneuvered so coldly to trap her even after she fled. Cassian's hand tightened at her back. She felt the tremor of restrained fury pass through him. "You think to blackmail my wife?" he asked, voice dangerously soft. "Your wife?" Hargrove laughed. "A sham ceremony performed in haste, without banns, without witnesses of note. The courts will set it aside the moment I present evidence of coercion or abduction. She is still promised to me." Ilara stepped forward, breaking Cassian's light hold. "I am no one's property, Baron. Least of all yours." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "You will be when your father begs me to take you back in exchange for leniency. Come now, Ilara. Do not make this harder than it must be." Cassian moved then, swift, silent. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and seized the papers from Hargrove's hand before the Baron could react. He scanned them once, then tore them in half with deliberate slowness, letting the pieces flutter to the wet stone. Hargrove's face purpled. "You dare." "I dare a great deal when it comes to what is mine," Cassian said. His voice was low, lethal. "Those debts. Paid. In full. My solicitor has already transferred the sum to your accounts along with a generous interest for your trouble. You will find the draft waiting when you return to town. Hargrove stared. You lie. Cassian smiled, a cold, predatory thing that made even his own men shift uneasily. I do not lie. I act. And I act decisively. He turned to Hargrove's mounted companions. You are witnesses. Baron Hargrove came here to extort money and threaten violence against a peeress of the realm. If he persists, I will have him arrested for attempted blackmail and trespass. If he leaves now, quietly, the matter ends. One of the men glanced at Hargrove, then at Cassian's scarred face and the unmistakable menace in his stance. They began to back their horses away. Hargrove's composure cracked. This is not over. She will tire of your hospitality. She will see you for the monster you are. Cassian stepped closer, close enough that Hargrove instinctively retreated a step. She has already seen me, Cassian said quietly. And she stayed. He turned then, offering Elara his arm. She took it without hesitation. Hargrove watched them ascend the steps, rain dripping from his hat brim. His voice followed them, bitter and broken. You will regret this, Thorn. Both of you. The doors closed behind them with a resounding thud. Inside the hall, silence fell. Cassian did not release her arm. Instead he drew her into the nearest alcove, away from the servant's eyes. Are you all right? He asked, voice rough. Elara nodded, though her hands trembled. You paid the debts. I did. Why? He looked at her, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time. Because the thought of him touching you, of him having any claim on you, made me want to tear the world apart. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle despite the violence that still simmered in his eyes. Because I realized, watching him stand there demanding what was never his, that I cannot bear the idea of losing you. Not to him. Not to anyone. Elara's breath caught. Cassian's hand slid to the nape of her neck, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I swore I would never let another woman close enough to wound me, he whispered. But you slipped past every defense I had. And now I find I am possessive. Protective. Jealous in a way I have never been before. He leaned in until their foreheads touched. You are my wife, he said, the word no longer foreign but reverent. In name and, God help me, in every way that matters. If you will have me. Elara lifted her hand to cover his. I already do, she whispered. For a long moment they stood there, breathing the same air, the storm outside reduced to a distant murmur. Then Cassian kissed her, not the near miss of nights before, but fully, fiercely, claiming her mouth with a hunger that had been leashed too long. When he drew back, his eyes burned. No more bargains, he said. No more pretending this is temporary. Elara smiled against his lips. No more pretending at all. Chapter 8. He stormed into her room at midnight, soaked from the storm again. I can't pretend anymore. You are mine, body, heart, everything, or I will let you go and destroy myself in the process. Elara bolted upright in bed, heart slamming against her ribs. The fire had burned low, casting long, wavering shadows across the chamber. Rain lashed the windows once more, as though the sky itself had returned to witness whatever reckoning was about to unfold. Cassian stood in the doorway, greatcoat dripping onto the carpet, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wild with something she had never seen in him before, desperation, raw and unshielded. Water streamed down the scar on his face, tracing the jagged line like tears he refused to shed. She threw back the covers and stood, nightdress whispering against her legs. Cassian, what is it? He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. His chest rose and fell as though he had run the entire distance from the stables. I rode out after Hargrove left, he said, voice rough. To make certain he was truly gone. He wasn't. His gathered men, 6 of them, armed. They're camped on the moor road, waiting for first light. He means to take you by force if he must. Claims the marriage is invalid, that you were coerced. Says he'll challenge me to settle it like gentlemen, pistols at dawn, or simply drag you away while I bleed out in the mud. Elara's blood turned cold. A duel? Or worse. Cassian's hands clenched at his sides. He knows I'll meet him. He knows I'll die before I let him near you. And he's counting on it. She stepped closer. Then we leave. Tonight. We ride for the coast, find a ship. No, he caught her wrists gently, thumbs brushing the pulse points where her heartbeat raced. Running ends nothing. He will hunt us. Your family will suffer. And his voice cracked. I cannot live as a fugitive. Not again. Not after what Amelia did. Not after the war taught me there is no outrunning shame or pain. Ilara searched his face. The ice that had once armored him was gone, shattered, melted away in the heat of whatever war he fought inside himself now. Then what? She whispered. Cassian released her wrists only to cup her face in both hands, palms rough and warm despite the chill clinging to his skin. I love you, he said. The words came out like a confession torn from him. I swore after Amelia that I would never let another woman inside these walls, never let anyone close enough to break me again. I built this place like a fortress, cold, empty, safe. Then you collapsed at my gates, drenched and defiant, and every stone I laid crumbled. You saw the scars. You heard the whispers. You stayed. You looked at me not as a monster, not as a title, but as a man. And you healed parts of me I thought were dead forever. Tears stung Ilara's eyes. She lifted her hands to cover his, holding them against her cheeks. I never asked you to heal me, she said softly. I only asked you to see me. Truly see me. And you did. From the first moment you refused to leave me in the rain. You protected me when no one else would. You gave me your name when I had nothing left. You fought for me today when Hargrove tried to claim what was never his. How could I not love you? Cassian exhaled a shuddering sound that might have been relief or surrender. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. I am terrified, he admitted. Terrified that if I let myself have you, I will wake tomorrow and find it gone. That Hargrove will take you, or that I will ruin it myself with my temper, my past, my scars. You won't. Ilara slid her arms around his neck, fingers threading into wet hair. Because I am choosing you. Every day. Every storm. Every scar. He made a low, broken sound in his throat. Then he kissed her. Not the fierce claim of the alcove earlier that day, this was deeper, slower, a pouring out of everything he had held back. His mouth moved over hers with reverence and hunger in equal measure, his hands slid down her back, pulling her flush against him until she felt the rapid beat of his heart matching hers. Rainwater soaked through her nightdress where his coat pressed against her, but she did not care. She kissed him back with everything she had withheld, every moment of longing, every night she had lain awake wondering if he would ever cross that final threshold. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian rested his forehead against hers again. I will face Hargrove at dawn, he said quietly. But not for pride. Not for honor. For you. Because you are worth every risk. Because I want a life with you, not a shadow of one. Ilara tightened her arms around him. Then let me stand beside you. Not behind you. Not hidden. Beside you. He pulled back just enough to look at her. It could end badly. Then we end it together. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first true, unguarded one she had ever seen. He kissed her again, softer this time, lingering. When he drew away, he lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed a kiss to the wedding ring he had placed there. Stay here, he murmured. Lock the door. I will wake you before dawn. Whatever happens, know this, you are mine, Ilara Thorne. And I am yours. Completely. She nodded, throat too tight for words. Cassian stepped back, reluctant, then turned toward the door. At the threshold he paused, looking back at her one last time, rain-soaked, scarred, fierce, and utterly hers. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Ilara stood in the center of the room, lips still tingling, heart full and aching in equal measure. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside her something had finally broken open, something bright, something unbreakable. Dawn would bring Hargrove. Dawn would bring pistols and blood and final choices. But dawn would also bring the truth they had both fought so long to deny. They loved each other. And love, she thought as she returned to the bed and pulled the covers around her, was a weapon more powerful than any pistol. She closed her eyes, listening to the rain. Tomorrow, whatever came, they would face it together. Chapter 9. As the blade flashed in the moonlight, she stepped between them and whispered, "If you harm him, you harm me, and I will never forgive you." The dueling ground was a flat stretch of moorland just beyond the manor gates, chosen for its isolation and its view of the rising sun. Dawn had barely broken, the sky was the color of bruised steel, the air sharp with frost and the lingering scent of last night's rain. A thin mist clung to the grass, muffling sound, making every footfall feel like an intrusion. Cassian and Hargrove stood 20 paces apart, each with a second at his side. Cassian's second was his steward, loyal, grim-faced, and armed only with a lantern. Hargrove had brought 2 of his hired men, both carrying pistols as backups. The Baron himself held a rapier, thin and wicked in the pale light. Cassian had chosen the same weapon, though his grip was steady where Hargrove's hand trembled with rage. Ilara had not been meant to witness this. Cassian had left her chamber at first light with a kiss to her forehead and a murmured promise to return. But she had followed, slipping through the servants' passages, borrowing a cloak from the stables, moving silently across the frost-crusted ground until she reached the rise overlooking the field. She had arrived just as the seconds stepped back and the duel began. Steel met steel with a ringing clash. Hargrove lunged first, wild, furious, driven by humiliation more than skill. Cassian parried with economical precision, his scarred face impassive, body moving as though the fight were a dance he had long mastered. He did not press, he defended, forcing Hargrove to expend energy, to tire, to expose himself. But Hargrove was desperate. On the third exchange he feinted low, then slashed high, aiming not for Cassian's shoulder, but his throat. The blade caught the first rays of sun and flashed like lightning. Ilara did not think. She ran. She threw herself between them just as Cassian raised his own rapier to block. The tip of Hargrove's sword halted an inch from her chest, stopped only by Cassian's sudden, iron grip on the Baron's wrist. Time seemed to fracture. Hargrove's eyes widened in shock. Cassian's face drained of color. Ilara, Cassian's voice was raw, almost a growl. She did not look at him. She looked straight at Hargrove. "If you harm him," she repeated, louder now, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, "you harm me. And I will never forgive you. Not in this life. Not in the next." Hargrove's sword wavered. His men shifted uneasily. The steward moved forward, hand on his pistol. You would die for him?" Hargrove asked, incredulous. "I would live for him," Ilara answered. "And I will not stand by while you destroy the only man who has ever seen me, truly seen me, as more than a dowry or a prize." Cassian's grip on Hargrove's wrist tightened until the Baron hissed in pain. Slowly, deliberately, Cassian forced the sword downward until its point rested harmlessly in the frost. "Enough," Cassian said. His voice carried the weight of command. "You came for revenge. You found only truth. Leave. Now. And never set foot on Blackthorn land again." Hargrove's face twisted rage, shame, defeat. He looked from Ilara to Cassian, then back again. The fight drained from him like water from a cracked vessel. "You think this ends here," he spat, but the words lacked conviction. "It ends here," Cassian replied. "Your debts are paid. Your reputation is intact, for now. But if you speak a word against my wife, if you send another man, if you so much as whisper her name in a tavern, I will ruin you. Completely. And I will enjoy it." Hargrove's seconds exchanged glances. One stepped forward and placed a hand on the Baron's shoulder. "Come, sir. It's over." Hargrove wrenched free, but he did not raise his sword again. He turned, mounted his horse without another word, and rode away into the mist. His men followed. Silence fell. Cassian dropped his rapier. It clattered to the frozen ground. He turned to Ilara. She was shaking now, reaction setting in, cold seeping through her thin cloak. But she did not look away. Cassian crossed the distance in 2 strides and fell to his knees before her. The great Duke of Blackthorn, scarred, feared, unbreakable, knelt in the frost at her feet. "Forgive me," he said, voice breaking. For every cold word. For every wall I built. For every moment I let fear keep me from saying what I felt from the very first night. He took her hands in his, pressing them to his lips. I loved you then, he whispered. When you collapsed at my gates, drenched and defiant, refusing to beg. I loved you when you wandered my halls and saw my scars and did not flinch. I loved you when you stood at that altar in the rain and bound yourself to me with nothing but courage. I have loved you every day since, and I was too broken, too afraid to admit it until I thought I might lose you forever. Tears slipped down Ilara's cheeks, warm against the cold morning air. She sank to her knees too, facing him, their foreheads touching. There is nothing to forgive, she said. You saved me. Not just from Hargrove. From a life of being unseen. You saw me. You chose me. And I choose you every scar, every storm, every vow you ever broke and every one you will keep. Cassian cupped her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. Then stay, he said. Not because of a bargain. Not because of protection. Stay because I cannot imagine a dawn without you in it. I already have, she answered. He kissed her then, slow, deep, reverent there on the moorland with the sun climbing higher and the mist burning away. No more shadows. No more pretense. When they rose, hand in hand, the steward approached with quiet respect. Shall I send word to the house, your graces? Cassian looked at Ilara, a small, real smile breaking across his face, the first she had ever seen unshadowed by pain. Tell them to prepare breakfast, he said. For two. And light every fire in the manor. The cold is gone. The steward bowed and withdrew. Cassian drew Ilara close, arm around her waist as they walked back toward Blackthorn Manor, tall, jagged, and no longer a fortress, but a home. The storm had passed. And in its place came something brighter. Redemption. Truth. Love. Chapter 10. In the quiet of Blackthorn's rose garden, under a sky finally clear, he slipped a real ring on her finger and vowed, I was the monster once, but you made me whole. Forever starts now. The garden had been neglected for years, thorny vines overtaking stone paths, roses grown wild and defiant, but that morning it felt reborn. Sunlight poured through the last wisps of mist, turning dew into diamonds on crimson petals. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming sweetness, a gentle counterpoint to the storm that had raged for so long. Ilara stood barefoot on the cool grass, still wearing the simple nightdress from the night before, her dark hair loose and tangled from sleep and wind. Cassian faced her in shirt sleeves and trousers, the scar on his face softened by the golden light. In his palm rested a new ring, plain gold, unadorned, chosen not for show but for truth. He took her left hand gently. The first one was a bargain, he said, voice low and steady. This one is a promise. He slid the ring onto her finger, covering the band from the chapel ceremony. It fit perfectly, warm from his skin. Ilara looked up at him, eyes shining. And what promise is that, your grace? That I will spend every day earning the right to call you mine. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the new ring. That I will protect you, cherish you, love you not because duty demands it, but because I cannot imagine breathing without you beside me. She stepped closer, resting her free hand over his heart. Then let me make the same vow, she whispered. I will stand with you through every shadow, every scar, every dawn. I will remind you daily that you are not a monster, you are my husband, my home, my heart. Cassian's breath caught. He drew her into his arms, cradling her against him as though she were something infinitely precious and fragile. They kissed there among the roses, slowly at first, then with deepening hunger. His hands slid down her back, pressing her closer until no space remained between them. She felt the steady thunder of his heartbeat, the warmth of his skin through thin fabric, the tremor in his fingers as they traced the curve of her spine. When he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the manor's open French doors, she laughed softly against his mouth, a sound of pure joy. Inside, the great bed in the master chamber waited, curtains drawn against the morning light, fire newly kindled by thoughtful servants. Cassian set her down gently, reverently, and they undressed each other with trembling hands and murmured words of wonder. No rush. No fear. Only the quiet certainty that this moment had been waiting since the night she collapsed at his gates. Their bodies met with the same fierce tenderness that had defined every step of their journey, passion tempered by care, desire woven with love. He whispered her name like a prayer, she traced every scar with her lips, claiming them as part of the man she adored. When they finally joined, it felt like coming home, deep, complete, eternal. Afterward they lay tangled in sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers threading lazily through her hair. "Children," he murmured against her temple. "I want them. A house full of them, laughing, running these halls, turning this place into something alive again." Ilara smiled, tracing idle patterns on his skin. "Girls with your strength," she said. "Boys with your heart." He chuckled, a rare, warm sound. "And one who looks exactly like you, defiant, beautiful, impossible to tame." She lifted her head to kiss him softly. "Then we begin," she whispered. Years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Blackthorn Manor no longer stood silent and shadowed. Windows glowed at night, laughter echoed through corridors that had once known only footsteps. The rose garden bloomed year-round, tended by small hands that left muddy prints on marble floors. Cassian Thorne, once the feared, reclusive duke, became known simply as the Duke who smiles. He rode the moors with his sons, taught them to fence and to listen. He carried his daughters on his shoulders through the gardens, pointing out every flower by name. The scar on his face remained, but it no longer defined him. It was merely part of the man who had learned to love again. Ilara watched it all from the terrace one late summer evening, a toddler balanced on her hip, two older children chasing fireflies across the lawn. Cassian approached from behind, arms slipping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "Look at them," he said softly. "Our chaos. Our miracle." She leaned back into him. "Our forever." He turned her gently to face him, lifting the toddler to his shoulder so he could cup Ilara's cheek with his free hand. "I was the monster once," he said, voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "But you made me whole." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, slow, lingering, full of the quiet certainty that time had only deepened. "And you made me free," she whispered against his lips. The children's laughter drifted on the warm breeze. Fireflies danced like tiny stars. The manor lights glowed behind them, welcoming, alive. Cassian drew her closer, the toddler giggling between them. "Forever starts now," he vowed again, the same words he had spoken in the rose garden so long ago. Ilara smiled, eyes shining with the same fierce love that had carried them through every storm. "Forever started the night I ran into the rain," she answered. "And it will never end." He kissed her once more, deep, possessive, tender, while the world spun softly around them. And in that moment, under a sky full of stars, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn stood together, redeemed, whole, and eternally bound.